Stay tuned to see how we gave this builder-grade linen closet a major upgrade within 24 hours. First, we need to take a few measurements before heading to the local home improvement store. After a quick trip, it's time to get set up, and while I'm getting set up, I'll take you through a few of the materials I needed to purchase. I started with some Minwax finish for $14.98, a 2-pack of foam rollers for $6.28, a 1/4-inch sheet of plywood for $37.71, 2 1x3s for $23.06, those are 8 foot in length, and then one 1x3 and 6 foot in length for $8.63. After tax, that brings a grand total to $97.23. I was able to get the home improvement store to rip my sheet of plywood into 16-inch wide sections. From there, I needed to measure and mark the necessary length needed for my shelving. In my case, that's 40.5 inches. So I mark it with the tape and extend the line with the speed square. With the line marked, we head over to the miter saw to cut it to length. After the first successful cut, we can use that piece as a template to measure the remaining 4 shelves. After cutting all the plywood to length, we can use those as a guide to measure against the 1x3s that will be used as the front of each shelf. After marking our board, we head back over to the miter saw to then cut this down to length as well. Then it's wash, rinse, and repeat again for all 5 shelves. I purchased 1x3s to use as the front of each shelf, which in reality are 2.5 inches wide. That's a little wider than I'm looking for each shelf to appear. So I actually am going to use my table saw here to rip that down to 2.25 inches and then move on from there. With all the shelf fronts cut down to final width, it's time for the most important part of the video. This is where I show my wife that I do, in fact, clean as I go, and I don't just wait until the end, although sometimes that's how it appears. With the sawing completed, it's time to move on to the router setup, which will be used to cut a groove in the front of each shelf so that I can attach the 1/4-inch plywood to the 1x3 and have a nice secure joint. For anyone at home that has a router but not a router table, I highly suggest creating one. I recently posted a YouTube short that shows you how I created this super simple router table that's already coming in handy. I'm using one of the 1/4-inch pieces of plywood in my speed square to set up the router to the appropriate depth so that we can cut our groove in the front. With the router set up, here comes the subconscious here goes nothing pose. Well, here goes nothing, y'all. Here comes the sanity check, and we're all good. cutting the first screw, we repeat the process for all 5 shelves. It's about here where my vacuum gets clogged, and you can see how big a difference it makes when it's actually working. With all the grooves cut, it's time we start the process of attaching the top to the front of each shelf. I'm using a combination of wood glue and 1-inch 18-gauge nails to secure the 2 pieces together. We are able to secure the top to the front of the first shelf without much issue, so we'll repeat this process for the remaining 4 shelves until all 5 have been completed. After successfully connecting the tops to the fronts of all 5 shelves, we then go back with wood filler to fill the nail holes and any gaps that have occurred in the joint. After that, we'll break for lunch so that our wood glue and wood filler have time to dry. I'm using a 40 grit sandpaper here just to remove the bulk of the wood filler. With the wood filler removed, it's time to head back to the router table so that we can round over the edges of our shelves. It's time for sanity check number 2, and we're all good. We're going to round over the top edge and the bottom edge of each shelf front so that there's no sharp edges that can get us while we're putting in and taking linens out. With the routing completed, we head back over to the sander, where we're starting with 120 grit. After sanding with 120 grit, I go back one last time with the wood filler to fill any last remaining cracks before continuing on with the final sand at 220 grit. Now it's time to start the staining process. I'm using a semi-transparent silvered gray from Minwax that I've used a few times before. After applying a thin coat everywhere, I come back with the rag to remove any excess, and I repeat the process for all 5 shelves. Once the stain has had a chance to dry, I do a quick hand sand and then hit it with a tack cloth to get the sawdust before applying the finish. The finish I chose for this project is the Minwax Polycrylic Crystal Clear Top Coat in a clear satin finish. After finishing the first coat, I let that dry fully. Then I came out a few hours later to start the second coat. I used the same process for the second coat, starting with a light hand sanding, then around with a tack cloth to remove any final sawdust before applying the second and final coat. With the second coat complete, I will let that dry fully overnight, and then come back in the morning to start the installation process. It's the next morning, and you guessed it, one final hand sand and around with a tack cloth, and then we'll bring them inside to install in the linen closet. After a couple rounds of Tetris, and by the third shelf, I figured out my technique, which was using the space above all the shelves to align the board, and then slide it down the front before laying it flat on top of the wire shelf. All that's left is to put the linens back in the linen closet and enjoy this for years to come. Thanks for watching, and please like and subscribe for more content.